Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Today is our second lecture of global business management, and the learning objectives of our lecture is there are four main learning objectives. The first one is to get familiar with the orientation and stages of globalization. The second one is to know the drivers of internationalization. The third one is to understand the significance of international business environment. The fourth one is to define the effect of culture on international business. Let's start with the first. We start our lecture with the quick recap of the last lecture. In the last lecture, we have discussed about the basic definitions of international business. As we discussed in the last lecture, international business is any activity or transaction which is carried out outside the borders of domestic market. And what are the differentiation between international business and global business? Or we can say that what are those factors which make global business different from the domestic business? These are political and legal differences. Political and legal differences are those such differences that a firm has to face in the new market. Of course, when a domestic firm is going to go in the foreign market, that firm is face different political and legal environment. Cultural environment, of course, the second factor is cultural environment. The third one is economic situation. That firm has to face a different economic situation. The fourth one is firm has to make the transactions in the different currency as compared to the domestic market's currency. The next one is restrictions, trade regulations and restrictions in the new market. The last one is cost of distance. Might be firm has to bear additional cost of transportation as compared to the domestic market. These are the different features of global business which make global business different from the domestic market's business. What are those forces of global business? These forces, we can differentiate these forces among push factors, pushing forces, or pulling forces. Push factors are those factors which push firm to move abroad from domestic to foreign market. We can see the examples of push factors as constraints within the domestic markets, unfavorable situation or conditions in the domestic market, or unavailability of financial resources or human capital resources, or unavailability of high technology or technology that is required for that firm to execute the business. These forces push firm to move outside the domestic market. And on the second hand, there are pull forces. Pull forces are such factors which attract firms to move away from domestic market to foreign market. These pull forces mainly are considered as profitability, which attract firm into the foreign market, growth opportunities that a firm see in the foreign market. These are the two main important drivers of which act as pull forces. If we see specifically each factor like profit margin in the growth, which is also a pull force. Growth opportunities are also as a pull force. Profit in the foreign market, in the foreign business, there is a huge profit margin which a firm always looking forward to seek and gain that profit. And growth opportunities to increase the market share across the globe. domestic market constraints. These are the push forces, like we discussed, that is the unfavorable conditions in the domestic market. Competition, the competition is also considered as a push factor. If the competition within the domestic market is so high, then firms have left with no choice except to move away from the domestic to foreign market. The government policies can be push factor or pull factor. For instance, if the government policies within the domestic markets are favorable, that can be positive or negative. Government policies, in the positive sense, we can see that government can make such policies which facilitate the international business and which motivates or encourage firms to go out from domestic to foreign market, like subsidies, tax exemptions, or providing extra finance to firms to move out from the domestic to foreign market. On the negative sense, we can see government policies which restrict firms to go to operate or expand the business in the domestic market, and ultimately firm has to move out from the domestic to foreign market. On the other hand, if we see the government policies in the global market, might be a firm can see a good attractive government policies in other countries. To get those opportunities, to get benefit from those policies in the other countries, firms can move out to that market as well. Okay, after that we have discussed the 4 types of international orientation. There are 4 types of orientation, international orientation: ethnocentrism, polycentrism, regionocentrism, and geocentrism. Main focus of those international orientations have been discussed in the last lecture. Like in ethnocentrism, market focus of those firms is only on the domestic market. Polycentrism, in polycentrism, market focus of that firms is in the host country. Host country means these firms consider domestic and foreign market as a separate market, and they make the separate strategies for each market. Regionocentrism, firm consider as a whole, the whole region as a single market, or we can say they divide the market according to the regions. The last one is geocentrism. Geocentrism, in this strategy, in this orientation, firm consider the whole globe as a single market. We will discuss a little bit pros and cons of these international orientation in this lecture. Before we start the new points of this lecture, we go to the mini case study that we had discussed in the last lecture, and we are going to discuss the answers of those questions. If we repeat the case study, the main highlights of that case study was like this. Procter & Gamble entered the Japanese market in 1972, was the first one to introduce the disposable diapers in Japan, and because of this uniqueness and because of this innovative product, they gained 80% of the market. But important thing was they couldn't sustain that growth, and their growth and market share fall from 80% to 8%. In order to sustain their market position, they introduced the new products, and they entered in the laundry detergent and personal care products, but even then those products couldn't succeed in the Japanese market, and they lost around $40 million each year. What was the problem? The main thing that the strategy, we can say the marketing strategy that they adopted in Japanese market was like this. In TV advert, this is the one exhibit of their marketing strategy. In TV advertisement, they showed a woman relaxing in a bath of soap bubbles while her husband walked in and asked her about the soap. The same advertisement produced the significant results in Europe and the US market, but they couldn't get the same results in Japan. The first question was why the successful advertisement in one market failed in another market. And the obvious answer of this question was the cultural differences. In one culture might be it's acceptable to show the a man, even the husband, is walked in the toilet in front of her wife, but might be in the other culture it's contradict the values of that culture. That's why that was a huge flop in the Japanese market. And the second question was, what was the central problem with the management's approach? Important thing we can say that ignoring the cultural differences, that was the main problem of that management approach, and they focusing purely on the domestic market strategies. If we see that despite they were originally that firm is belonged to US market, but the problem that we had, like international orientation strategies, we have seen that there was first strategy ethnocentrism strategy, and the second one was in the ethnocentrism strategy, firm is only focused on the strategies of domestic market, and when they enter into the foreign market, they extend their strategies, what they use, they follow in the domestic market. Here in this example, Procter & Gamble, they did the same. What the marketing strategies they have used in the US market or in EU market, they followed the same strategies in the Japanese market. They didn't follow the new they didn't make a new strategy, and they ignored the cultural differences across the regions, across the market. Let's start with the international orientations. Like we already discussed, there are 4 orientation strategies. We have already discussed the perception of market, and marketing strategies, first 3 rows in the last lecture. Now we start with the pros and cons of each strategy. The first advantage of the ethnocentrism strategy is there is no cost. Why there is no cost of their strategy in the new market? Because they are using the same strategy which they have already applied in the domestic market. The second one is easy route and lesser risk. This is the easy route. Of course, they don't have to make a lot of changes. And the less risk, again, same strategy they are using. They are applying the same strategy what they have used in the domestic market. That's why there is less risk involved in ethnocentrism orientation. On the other hand, what are the disadvantages with this strategy? It limits the scope of exploitation of internationalization. You are not using the different strategy, you are not exploiting the potential of the market, you are not acknowledging the difference across the cultures, so you are using the same strategy. In a way, you are not exploiting the growth opportunities present in that market. Let's go to the second one. The advantages of the polycentrism strategy is adoption to local market to exploit the benefit. In opposite to the first one, in the second polycentrism strategy, they are using the different new strategy for the foreign market. In fact, what they are doing, they are acknowledging the differences, the cultural differences of domestic market and the foreign market. Because of this, they can exploit the opportunities present in that market. And what are the disadvantages with this strategy? Higher cost of adoption. Of course, they are trying to make a new strategy, and they are going to implement that strategy in that market. That will cost money to them. And delays with adoption. When they adopt a new strategy, there is a possibility that there would be delays in adoption of that strategy. The third one. The advantages of the third one is they take the benefits of both localization and standardization. They acknowledge the concept of difference in the market, and they try to make a standardization across the regions, market present in the same region. And what are the disadvantages with the third strategy? It neglects differences across region. Important thing is they distribute the markets on the basis of regions, and they ignore the differences across the region. Let's go to the fourth strategy. In the fourth strategy, the advantages of fourth strategy is economy of scales, because they are producing the product at a huge scale. That's why, because of that fact, the cost of production will be reduced. That's the main big advantage. And the disadvantage is standardization is not always successful. They try to standardize the product across the globe, which might be not possible, which is not possible, might be across the market, across the globe. Now let's talk about the stages, different stages of globalization. There are different stages. There are, in fact, we can call them, we can distribute them in 5 stages of globalization. First of all, a firm which intends to go out in the beginning, that is a purely domestic firm. That firm start a small portion of small activity, foreign activity, and that firm become a domestic firm with some foreign business element. What can be those elements? Might be they can start with the import or export of products, or they can do a small small licensing or franchise. These are the 3 small fraction of internationalization that firm can use and become an international firm. When they establish in those areas, then that firm become an international firm. After expanding that international activity across the market and across the context, across in terms of financial commitments, in terms of investment, in terms of all those assets they are going to invest in the new market, and their spectrum will be increase, then that firm will be the global market. And global market mean they are going to cater across the globe. And the last one is a transnational company. Transnational company would be such a company which is operating across the continent. Okay, let's talk about the drivers and restrainers of globalization. The first one is the liberalization, which is most important driver of liberalization that we have seen in the recent decades. In the end of 2000, we can see the impact of liberalization or privatization and globalization. These are the terms that are often used collectively. In the end of 2000, a total of 1,185 regulatory changes were made across the globe, of which 1121 were for enhancing only FDI activities, foreign direct investment activities. Only in 2001, 208 regulatory changes were made by 71 countries. Of these, 43% were made in countries in Asia and Asia Pacific. Mean 43% were 43% of these regulatory changes were made by the developing countries, which includes the China and India. In Asia and Asia Pacific, during 2001, 97 countries made 158 bilateral investment treaties, mean how they are going to enhance their trade across the countries and how they are going to facilitate firms from each other country, and of which 66 were made between developing countries. Important thing is the huge proportion of these bilateral investment treaties were made in between the developing countries. As we have seen the example of BRIC countries, they have the treaties. SAARC countries, they have treaties to enhance the trade within the SAARC countries. MNC, the second driver is the multinational companies. We have seen a huge surge of multinational countries, multinational companies all over the globe. What is how they impact? Most importantly, multinational companies, they impact on globalization through increasing the competition in domestic market. By increasing the competition, by providing the more competition to domestic market, domestic firms, they are in fact motivating or pushing those firms to go out from the domestic to foreign market. Technology is another big motivator of this globalization. In technology, we can see that the most important factor is the depth of distance. Because of this technology, distance is reduced across the continents. Now firms within no fraction of seconds, they can communicate with each other, and they can make and perform transactions. The second one is no boundaries. The most important thing they call about the technology is boundaryless. There is no boundary for the technology. If a technology is invented in one country, of course the other countries also get benefit because of those technologies. And the one important sector which get benefited from the technology is the healthcare sector. We can take example. In around us, we have seen the advent of these technologies and the benefits that we are availing from these technologies. And because of this technology, multinational companies and healthcare sector have improved their level of service to the customers. The next one is the World Wide Web, the Internet. Internet is also a big motivator of this globalization. If we see that trade reached to $6.8 trillion by 2004 from nothing in 1995. That's a big difference. In 1995, we see that on the internet there was no trade, no transactions, but on the other hand, in 2004, we can see the $6.8 trillion investment transactions on the World Wide Web. This web have facilitated not only the customers but also the companies. And important thing is now the transactions are not made only through between the customer to customers, but it's also business to business transactions are also seen very commonly. The next one is product development costs. Because of the cost of production has reduced, and because of this thing, new markets have emerged. A lot of domestic firms have started to initiate their activities in the foreign market. And the next one is the competition, because in the domestic market, like we have discussed that because of advent of the new technology and multinational corporations, the competition in the domestic market is really increased, and because of this competition, local firms are forced to move out from their domestic market to see and to find out new opportunities in the foreign market. And these factors are not only bound to only the developing countries. These factors are also common in the developed countries. We have seen this thing that competition is increased in developed countries as well, because the new entrants in the market from emerging economies like Brazil, India and Russia and China, these firms belong to those countries. They started their operations in the US and the EU, and the level of competition has increased in those developed markets as well. And what was their choice of the firms that operating there? These developed countries firms, those firms starting to move out in other regions as well, because of that increase of competition. The next one is regional integration. That's really important thing. Because of regional integration, a lot of firms started to move out from their own market. Like we have seen in the recent years, EU, European Union, EE, European Economic Union, these integrations facilitated firms to move across the Europe. North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, the BRIC. These are the agreements that regional integrations which facilitated firms to move out. Importantly, these countries, by these integrations, they reduce the trade barriers, they reduce the tariffs and they started to provide the subsidies to the companies to enhance or to motivate those firms, encourage those firms to move out from the domestic market. The last one is the leverage. Leverage is advantages by experiencing the international market. There are 4 types of leverages. The first one is leverage experience transfers. By doing the international activity, firms avail the experience of management, their operation, their production, their marketing, their finance. In all those disciplines, these firms get the experience and of international market. And because of those experiences, these experiences, when they expand their business, of course, they get the benefit of those experience. And the level of expansion automatically increased. The next one is a scale economy. Again, when they increase because of this foreign activity, international business, when they have to increase the level of production, and when they increase the level of production, the cost of production automatically decrease. The next one is resource utilization. Resource utilization mean they know, because of this foreign activity, they know how to utilize the resources, best optimum utilization of resources. The next one is global strategy. Built on global strategy, while doing the international business, they learn to make a global strategy. An important thing is this strategy is based on the scanning of the environment. As we have seen this, might be you have studied this course of business strategy. A firm even operating in the domestic market, they make their strategy while scanning their environment, there's strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats analysis. And by doing these 4 factors, they do the same things, the same 4 the SWOT analysis they do in the international market, and they make a global strategy. Now let's talk about the restraining forces. What are those forces which restrain firms to go out from the domestic market? These restraining forces, we can divide them into the external factors and internal factors. External factors mean policies and regulations from the government. These are the external factors. How these factors can impact negatively for FDI, or from internationalization. Firm can these government or regulations or policies, they can discourage firms to go out from the domestic to foreign market. Like in the control economies, like in Russia, North Korea, it's very common to observe this sort of pattern, that government is restricting the domestic firms to go out. The next one is internal factors. These are important one. What are these factors? These are the organizational resources and culture. Organizer might be a firm that doesn't have that enough or sufficient resources like capital or cash flow or human capital to move out from the domestic to foreign market. The second factor is the culture. Might be that firm is immune with the domestic culture and they are used to of this culture, and they might be scared to go out and see or experience the new culture, and that's why they want to just stay in the domestic market. And the third one, that can be we have seen the mindset of the management. They have the mindset that they will not succeed in the foreign market, and that's why they are going to stay only the domestic market. These are the restraining factors which prohibit firms to go out from domestic to foreign market. Now the next topic that we are going to discuss is global business decision. Global business decision, how firms make a decision whether they have to move out or not. The first decision, while making this decision, the first step they have to see is they have to analyze their own resources, and they have to see the environment. These are the, like we have in the last slide, we have seen the internal restraining factors, internal factors. If the firm, like in continuation of that point, we have to see, this is the first step firm has to analyze: do they have sufficient resources? And the second thing is company objectives. What are the company objectives? If their objective is to only cater the domestic market, then they have to stay only in the domestic market. But of course, if the firm have the resources, they can revise their objectives. The next one is a market potential. They have to scan the external market, the market where they are intend to go. They have to scan the market opportunities in that market. The next one is environmental factors. Environmental factors, again, like we discussed in the last slide, that environmental factor, the policy and regulations of the domestic market. And in this environmental factors, we have to see the environmental factors of that foreign market as well. To what extent these factors impact on the potential activities in that market. The next step, once a firm have decided that they intend to move out from the domestic to foreign market, and they have the objectives are aligned with the foreign activity, and they have sufficient resources, human capital resources and human resources to move out, and those at that time market in the foreign market have the market potential of that product. And environmental factors in the domestic market and the foreign market are friendly, and they facilitate in that decision. Then in the next step, firm has to decide about in which market they have to go. In this decision, they have to see several things. First of all, they have to decide while selecting the market, they have to see the distance between the domestic to foreign market. If they intend to do the just import or export, might be that factor will be a huge factor, and they have to consider, because if the location of that foreign market is far away, then the cost of transportation will be increased. That's why might be firm will think over about the selection of that market. The next one can be the what sort of political situation or political relationship of that market, that country has with their domestic country, their home country. We can say that political relationship between the host and home country. These are the important factors. Because of this if they are friendly relationship, there is a possibility these countries have signed some treaties, some trade agreements between them to enhance the foreign trade. And next thing is, again, we can say that the next factor while to select the market is it also depends on the type of product or services that they're trying to start in the new market. For instance, if they need a higher technology or new technology, might be those firms will target or will select such market which have a higher technology. Might be more advanced technology or advanced countries. Might be those countries will go to the advanced markets. After selecting the market, they will go to the next step, and they have to select what is the entry mode in that market, how they have to enter in that market. Either they have to enter through export or import or licensing or franchise, or these are for our light mode of entry, which does not require so much risk, financial commitment or human commitment. These are easy to less commitment, and these are easy to retrieve back. If that not successful, some firm can bear the cost of failure. On the other hand, the heavy investment requiring modes can be the foreign direct investment and joint venture, merger and acquisition. These three modes require a huge investment, which entails a really big investment, risk, human capital investments, and big commitment. Firm has in the third step, firm has to select an entry mode. And the last one is, when firm has selected entry mode, they have to decide about what sort of structure they have to use, a business structure they have to use for that international activity in that international foreign market. It depends on importantly, it depends on level of internationalization, nature of product, market and resources. We can see this thing that, like in the previous slides, we have seen that the internationalization orientations, the 4 type of orientations, and if they have this sort of orientation, this organizational structure depends on those orientations. Nature of product, that's also important contributor. Market, can they have some sort of wholly owned subsidiary there in that market? If it's possible, then they can have a separate independent unit there. And resources, that's the most important thing. Resources, whether firm can afford to make a different organizational structure and open a new organizational branch or subsidiary in the new market. These are the 4 steps which determine a firm to go out, and how they are going to out, and where they are going to out, and how they are going to make the organizational structure in that new market. Now we will start about the next chapter. Our first chapter, that was the introduction and the basic elements of international business. That's finished, and now we go to the next one that talks about the international business environment. A business environment, a firm where operates the surrounding in the short terms, we can say that a surrounding of any business where it operates is the business environment. A firm in international market, when we talk about the international firm, we see that there are 3 sort of business environment firm has to encounter. The first one is the domestic environment, the second one is the foreign environment, and the third one is the global environment. Domestic environment is the same environment that firm is facing in the domestic market. In the foreign environment where market is where the firm intends to go, what is the environment in that market. And the third one is global environment. What is meant by global environment? Global environment mean the treaties like World Trade Organization. This sets the rules and procedures of the environment across the globe, and the treaties across the countries, across the globe, across the regions. These treaties decides the global environment. They set the global environment. We can talk about one example. A company intends to enter in foreign market, have to adopt internationally acceptable standards and practices like accounting, reporting, and corporate governance. For instance, a firm is intended to go out from domestic like India to the foreign market like USA. What they have to do, they have to follow like for instance in reporting and accounting standard, they have to follow GAAP standards, generally acceptable accounting procedures. They have to follow, rather than following the local procedure, accounting or reporting procedure that they follow in the domestic Indian market, rather than following those standards, they have to follow the GAAP procedures. And then similarly, they have to follow the corporate governance standards as well. Like in corporate governance standards, they have to, first of all, they have to have in their corporate boards enough number of independent directors, executive directors. They must have the women representation, mean diverse board, gender diversity in the board composition. Why they need this sort of corporate combination or more diverse board? To increase the more monitoring and strong corporate governance in that firm. I mean, when they move from India to USA, they have to follow the international standards which are applicable in the US market. Important thing is, a key to success in the foreign market is adoption to the differences in the markets, in the international market specifically. As Professor Lee suggested, that the root cause of most international business failure is the self-reliance criteria, that is, an unconscious reference to one's own cultural values, experiences and knowledge on the basis of decision. If we talk about the SRC, what is meant by this? When a firm, we continue with the example of Indian firm and Chinese operating or intending to go in the USA, what is the problem? What is the SRC problem? What they are going to face in the US market is, they are, whenever they have to make some decision, strategic decision or management decision, they have to unconsciously, they will make the decision on the basis of cultural values that they have, Indian cultural values, beliefs, their experiences that they have, Indian experiences, and the knowledge what they have in the domestic market, Indian domestic markets knowledge. They are going to make all those strategic management decisions on the basis of their previous unconscious values, cultural thoughts, experiences and knowledge, even in the USA. What Professor Lee suggests to rectify this problem, Professor Lee suggested that there is one simple way, that when you encounter this problem, define your problem and objective, problem and solution. For instance, that Indian firm faced that problem in the US market. What they have to do, they have to define that problem and solution and try to find that solution in both market. Think that problem, if that problem occurs in the Indian market, what they are going to, what would be the solution of that problem, and in the second step, they have to think the same problem in the US market, and what would be the answer in the US market. And then in the third step, they have to compare the answers of both contexts, in the US and Indian context, and in the fourth step they are going to finalize what are those elements which are influencing the US companies' decision, in US decision, how they can remove those SRC from that perspective. In a way, we can say that they have to remove those similar items, like if they are cultural belief, their decisions are making on the basis of cultural beliefs of Indian thoughts, they have to think differently. They have to accept the cultural differences of the new market and try to propose solutions according to new market. Okay, solution is to compare the different solution across markets. Another example that we can state is American company Texas Instruments, which is the producer of semiconductor, and entered in Japanese market and adopted the home market approach to higher pay and benefits, and dismissing the Japanese system of offering bonus twice a year. What they were doing, they were adopting, this is an American company which entered in the Japanese market. What they were doing, they are following the same standard HR procedures what they use in the US market. They're hiring, firing, pays and bonuses, all those procedures, US procedures, they are following in the Japanese market. And they are dismissing, they are not following the standard procedure of Japanese market. What was that? To offer 2 bonuses in a year. They were not they are not following that procedure. What was the consequence of that clash? Of course, employees were demotivated. That's the obvious consequence. And ultimately, what would happen, that overall performance of the employees decreased because of demotivation, and ultimately the performance of overall company reduced. Now we talk about that was the business environment. Within the business environment, the most important element is the culture. We will talk about how culture impact on international business. Culture is the integrated system of learned behavior, patterns, that characteristics of the members of any given society. That important thing is these are the integrated system of learned behavior which characterizes the members of any society. How the culture influences any business? It influences the international business activities such as market customers, marketing strategies, human resources, negotiation between the firms, and so on. Importantly, we define the culture into two types. First one is the high context culture, and the second one is low context culture. High context culture is such culture where context is strongly influences the culture, like Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, and the remaining Gulf countries, and in Asian countries we can see the Japan. They are considered as high context culture countries. In low context culture countries mean where context influences the culture at the smaller scale, like USA and the European countries. Cultural next point is culture can be homogeneous, and there can be intracultural differences based on nationality, origin, race, or religion. We can see this thing that if the country is in an overall country, culture can be homogeneous, or homogeneous means there are no subcultures within the country. But on the other hand, on the basis of nationality, on the basis of religion, on the basis of race, there can be a subcultures within the larger big country. As we can see in India, on the basis of different religion, they have different culture. On the basis of different languages, they have different cultures. And basis of in America, they are basis of different race. They have different cultures. In Afro-American people, they have different culture compared to the white people. Similarly, the Hispanic culture is different, which you can observe in the southeast region, where the Hispanic people, the population of Hispanic people is in majority. You can see a different culture in those areas. Similarly, if we see in Canada, French-speaking parts have different culture as compared to the white-speaking states. Some cultures are more dominating. This is the important point. Some cultures have more power to influence the smaller cultures. Like as we have seen around us, that the US culture is most dominating culture, and most important way to dominate that culture is through media. Against this dominance, there are countries like in Canada. In June 2008, they initiated one conference, and 17 countries participated at that conference to discuss how the dominance of US culture should be tackled. And in the EU countries, if we talk about them, they have 40%. They have this law, the procedure in media, that in TV programs, that 40% of programs should be local, domestic, should be focused on the domestic market, and there are to tackle the US dominance culture. Within the culture, there are several elements. The first one is the language. Within language can be the verbal and non-verbal, the religion, values and attitudes, manners and customs, material elements, aesthetics, education, social institutions. These are the various elements of culture. The first one is the language. Language differences across the market. There is a difference between the languages across the markets, across the countries. For instance, we can discuss the few instances how a single sentence can be interpreted in the different markets. For instance, tabling the proposal means in the US that manager wants to delay the decision while British manager would take it as immediate action should be taken. This is the same statement, but US manager is perceiving differently as compared to the British manager. Similarly, by the end of the day, this is a phrase. British manager doesn't mean that this work should be done within 24 hours. Rather, he considered that when he will finish the job. On the other hand, US manager will take it as a within 24 hours. With non-speaking messages, that was the verbal communication, and non-verbal. There is another part of language is non-verbal communication. In non-verbal communication, managers can be lost in translation, like in body language, gesture, and etc. There are 4 elements within non-spoken language that manager must know: time, space, material possessions, friendship pattern. Like time, across the countries, time constraints are different. Like people are following the time set time in some countries, while in other countries they don't follow. Space, in some countries when they talk, they discuss with each other. If we talk about at the corporate level, the manager talk with each other, they keep the distance when they talk with each other. In some nations, in some countries, they don't maintain the distance between them. Similarly, level of friendship can be different. Informal, that can be formal and informal. We can say about non-verbal communication, like in OK sign that we do in with the hand, the gesture of that thing. It interpreted in the US and the EU as a OK sign. It's fine, but on the other hand, in Brazilian context, this is considered as an insulting sign. The next element of culture is the religion. Religion is reflected in attitude and values of the society. For firms, it can be a task of organizational integration, coordination, harmony. Mean religion affects on international business through organizational integration, coordination, and harmony within the business, within the environment. Mean it sets the business environment. It also influences entrepreneurship, board of directors, consumption, level of consumption. How this one affect on these decisions we can discuss later on. Like in Christianity, these are the major religion across the globe. The first one is the Christianity. The manager should know about these religion and what are the major important celebrating days within these religions, and how they interchange the gifts between each other on these occasions. They should know the norms and culture on the basis of religion. Islam, in Islam, the important thing is the role of women, family. They emphasize on the family, religious restriction on the products, interest payments, advertisement. Similarly, Hinduism, they believe in the caste system, and the role of family is very important to them. Mean these are the different sort of religions, and like in Islam, the role of women is different. Mean women have a predefined role within the society according to Islam, and that's why might be a firm who is operating in the Muslim countries, might be they can face trouble in finding women human resource, because to cater to meet the business of the women customers, they need more women on board, but they cannot find those resources, those enough qualified women directors, because the supply of women directors or women managers is short in those countries because of this belief that women might be at home, or this predefined gender roles. Family, again, they emphasize the role of family. Like in Islam, they have this thing. Similarly, if we talk about the certain countries like in Italy, Spain, they have more focus on the role of family and the business within the family. And when they include the new board of members, they try to hire, or they try to include those people within the family to retain the information within the family. Religious restriction on the product might be products that are available, that those firms sell in the foreign market might be not possible in the Muslim countries, like alcohol or the pork related products. Interest payments, in Islam the interest payment is forbidden. Might be while doing the transaction within the Islamic countries like Iran, interest is forbidden, and might be that firm has to face the trouble in that thing. And the last one is advertisement. In certain countries, the morality level is different across the country to country. That's why these managers should know these various aspects of the businesses on the basis of religion, how the people believe, and they have the values, attitudes towards the religion, and how this religion affects on their business. Like in this one, the next one, that manners and custom, that's the third element of the culture. The really good, interesting example of General Foods Tang. This is a drink that we also use in Pakistan. This is a refreshment drink in Pakistan, but in USA, this is the breakfast drink. In advertisement, how they advertise this Tang product as a breakfast product in the USA, while we see here in our country they advertise this product as a refreshing product which can be used anytime. If we continue this thing here about the manners and customs, in China, in China they have the Chinese New Year celebrations. In India, they have Diwali festival. In Japan, they have Osalbo festival. In Mexico, Christmas or New Year. And in Saudi Arabia, they have the Eid al-Fitr. These are the different occasions on the basis of their customs and manners. They exchange gifts with each other. And this table shows that what sort of gifts should be recommended, or they have to exchange these gifts, should be exchanged between each other, and which should not be exchanged on these occasions in these countries. Like in China, modest gifts such as coffee table, books, ties, pens, they are okay, but clocks, anything from Taiwan, these are not recommended, and managers, they should avoid these things. In India, sweets, nuts, fruits, elephant carving, candle holders, these are totally fine on the Diwali festival. On the other hand, leather objects, snake images, they should be avoided. In Japan, scotch, brandy, fruit such as melons and Americana, these are the things that are recommended to exchange on this occasion. On the other hand, gifts that come in the set of 4 or 9, they are strongly avoided. Mexico, on the Christmas or New Year, desk, clock, fine pen, gold lighters, these are totally okay. And on the other hand, sterling silver items, logo gifts, food baskets, these are not allowed. These are not recommended, in fact, I should say, in Mexico on Christmas or New Year. Saudi Arabia, fine compasses to determine the direction of prayer, or cashmere, these are totally okay. On the occasion of Eid al-Fitr or Eid al-Adha. On the other hand, pork or pig skin liquor or alcohol, these are not allowed to exchange in those countries. Okay, now we talk about a mini case study before we finish today's lecture. We will talk about the Nestle's, a small case study, that the statement of that case study is like this. Main highlights that this is the largest food company which has the headquarters in Switzerland, but its product can be found all over the world. Unlike the common way to make different websites for different markets by simply having an extension of Swiss site, Nestle developed different websites for each company like USA, UK, Japan and Philippines. The question that you have to think over are like this. By not having the extension websites, they are rejecting the basic assumption that internet culture overcome any differences of national culture. Can you think of any reason? If I explain this question is like this. Few firms, they are using just the extension and they are believing that they don't need the separate website for each country. Why? Because they believe that internet culture overcome any differences of national culture. That's why they can have just an extension of the main website. But Nestle didn't do this thing. They made a separate website for each country. Our question that you have to think about is why they did that. Second question is, despite having similar products across the markets, why Nestle have different websites for each market? That's another question. They can use the same website for each country. The third task that you have to do is visit these websites, the different websites, especially US, UK and Gulf countries. You can find the website for the China even. You have to visit these websites and identify how Nestle responds to the cultural differences. And the answer of these questions we are going to discuss in the next lecture. Now we do the quick recap after today's lecture. We started with the 4 types of business orientations, and in fact we did discuss about the pros and cons of those orientations, and after that we discuss about the globalization stages. There are 5 stages: purely domestic firm, small foreign activity. In the next step, firm is purely domestic, then they start some small foreign activity like import or export or licensing. And then they later on they expand this small activity to a larger activity and they become an international firm. Again, they expand this business to a greater extent, and they involve their international business across the countries, and they become a multinational firm. When they expand this business to across the continent, they become a transnational firm. And the next point that we discussed, that was drivers. What are the drivers of globalization? The main driver was liberalization. We have seen the financial reforms, especially in the emerging economies. Technology. Because of technology, we see the death of distance. Distance has been removed to undertake the business across the countries. The next one is no boundaries. This technology doesn't have any boundary. If some firm invents some technology in one country, automatically firms situating in the other countries, they also get benefit from that technology. Multinational countries. Because of multinational countries, a huge surge of multinational countries is observed across the globe, and because of those pressure from those multinational companies, domestic firms starting to move out. The World Wide Web, Internet. Because of Internet, business to business and business to customer, this relationship, these transactions have increased. Product development cost. Because of this technology, cost of production has been reduced. Competition, again like multinational firm, because of multinational corporations, the competition has increased in all over the world in the domestic markets, and firms are forced to go out. The next point was regional integration. Because of regional agreements, agreements between the countries, between the regions. Because of these things, they have facilitated the firms situating in those countries, in those regions, to start more international businesses. The next point was leverage advantages by experience. That means firms get the experience, get the advantage by having more experience of international business. There are 4 types of advantages that firm can get because of these international activities: experience transfer, experience of management, experience of their management skills, strategy, and their supply chain. These are the different experiences they are going to get in these fields, and they are going to utilize these experiences to expand their business, or they use these experiences even in their own domestic market as well. Economy of scale: when they increase the level of production, of course the level of the cost of production automatically go down. And the resource utilization, they learn, because of this foreign exposure, they learn how to optimally utilize the resources. And the global strategy, they make the global strategy by scanning the global environment. The next one was the restraining forces. We have discussed the external and internal restraining forces. External forces were regulations or policies by the government which prohibit firms to go out, and the internal forces are the internal capability of the firm which stop firm to go out. These capabilities can be the lack of finance, lack of human capital, and lack of technology, and these things. International business decision making, that was the next topic. And how firm decide to go out. There were 4 steps involved. The first one was they have to scan their environment, and they have to see their objective. They have to analyze their resources. They have to see the market potential, and then they decide, do they need to go out or stay in the domestic market. Once they see that and decide that they have to go out, they can go out from the domestic market, then in the next step they have to select the market, in which market they have to go out. In the third step, they have to decide the entry mode. They have to decide in which mode they have to enter in the foreign market. These different modes can be the import or export or licensing or the outsourcing. They can be merger and acquisition, FDI, or joint venture. And the last one is they have to when they decide the entry mode, then they have to change the organizational structure on the basis of their resources and their market and their entry mode. These are the 4 steps they have to undergo while making the international business decision. The next step was the next topic that we had discussed was business environment. In business environment, firm has to face domestic business environment, international business environment, and global. And self-reliance criteria that we had discussed. The next topic we had seen culture. How culture impacts on the business. Culture is an integrated system of learned behavior and patterns that characterizes the members of any society. Again, there are high context culture and low context cultures. High context, where context is more influenced on the culture, and low context means where context is less influenced on the culture. Like the example of high context is Saudi Arabia and Japan, and low context mean USA and EU. The next topic was elements of culture. We had discussed the language, how language affects on the business, international business, and what is the significance of language for any manager to undertake the international business. Languages, there are verbal and non-verbal languages. The second one is religion, the importance of religion in international business that any manager has to understand. And the next one is manners and customs. These are the various elements that firm's manager have to understand in order to take the international business. That was it for today's lecture. Thank you for today. Allah Hafiz.